You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Welcome to Digging Up Ancient Aliens. This is the podcast where we examine alternative history and ancient alien narratives in popular media. Do these ideas hold water to an archaeologist, or are there better explanations out there? We are now on episode 74, and I am Frederick, your guide into the world of pseudo-archaeology. This time, we will look back at two sites that we actually has covered in the past, but with some new information and approaches. Today's excursion is based on the Ancient Alien episode Mysterious Structures from Season 8. And this is basically a clip show from past episodes. A bit of an issue with Ancient Aliens is that they tend to reuse material over time. But to add a few new things to all of this, I'll discuss Ancient Aliens, Graham Hancock's latest season of Ancient Apocalypse, and a TikToker who is trying to say that Rapa Nui, or, well, Easter Island that it's more commonly known as, is either aliens, Atlantis, or both. And in the second half, we will look at the Coral Castle, and if this modern megalithic structure could be alien intervention. A hint, it's not. I want to thank all of you who support the show. It really means a lot to me, and you're really helping out producing this content, and I'm humbled and grateful for all your support. And if you want to help out, I'll tell you how to do that at the end, and how you will also get some bonus stuff out of this. Now, remember that resources and the sources and reading suggestions is available at our website, diggingupancientaliens.com. There you can also find contact info if you notice any mistakes or have any suggestions. And if you like the podcast, I would appreciate it if you left one of those fancy 5-star reviews that I heard so much about. Now that we are finished with our preparations, let's dig into the episode. Fellow archaeology lovers, science nerd and history enthusiast, have you ever dreamt of showcasing your passion for our history and science? Dig no further. Welcome to the official merchandise store for your favorite podcast, Digging Up Ancient Aliens. Embark on a journey through time with our exclusive collection. Wrap yourself in the mysteries of the past with our range of themed shirts, mugs, and apparel. Each piece tells a story about your passions and podcast preference. And for the devoted archaeology aficionados, unveil our latest treasure, the Archaeology Mafia t-shirt. It is more than just apparel. It's a statement, a tribute to those who dig deeper, question the unknown, and unravel the secrets of our ancestors. These are not just merchandise. They are future relics from a time yet to be fully understood. Symbols of your dedication to unveiling the truth behind ancient aliens and the real wonders of our past. Join the crew of Digging Up Ancient Aliens, wear your curiosity, flaunt your knowledge, and join the Archaeology Mafia. Visit our store now and you will get an offer you can't refuse. Let's keep the spirit of exploration alive. Log on to diggingupancientaliens.com/store and grab your piece of history. Remember, the past is always present. Right, so let's return to the Moai statues. Now, we have already visited Rapa Nui or Easter Island twice, but apparently it's time to return again to the island. We first went here in episode 27, where we discussed the Moai statues. And the second time was in episode 34, where we focused more on, Thor Heyerdahl's racist approach to the island, and the 2020 Ioannidis et al. Paper claiming a link between the Polynesian islands and Colombia. And like a lazy sitcom, I could make this segment into just a clip show of those two episodes, but let's try to avoid this. Instead, I want to grab things from Ancient Aliens that they bring up, and some of the TikToker named Jenna James, and a bit of Graham Hancock's new series, Ancient Apocalypse. So it will be a clip show, but it will contain some new content and maybe a little bit also new information for you. So, as we learned, this episode is one of those episodes where the writers have ran out of ideas, basically. There are not many new clips or information in the Ancient Alien part of this. What's interesting is that they actually bring up a myth that's actually been studied from an archaeological perspective.
According to the oral history of the Rapa Nui, the Moai were moved in a very unusual way.
They all reply basically the same thing. The Moai walked to the Ahu, and that's the only explanation that they give.
Right, so this is something we did in fact cover in episode 27. Lipo Hunt and Haoa conducted experimental archaeology in 2013 and demonstrated that you can move these blocks by walking them. Here we have a great example on how archaeologists investigate myths and use them for a foundation as for an experiment. And they tested the idea of walking a Moai statue, and they succeeded. They could prove that, well, you can get them to actually walk using ropes and a relatively small team of people doing this, basically just rocking it back and forth while moving it forward. And the base then kind of is used as to gain momentum, and it looks like it walks. And there's a link to that video in the show notes if you want to go and watch it by yourself. It's really interesting stuff. But this is an experiment that's not covered at all by the alternative history crowd. And you can ask yourself, why not? Here is precisely what they're actually asking for: academia using myth as a basis for their experiments. Now, it so happens that Graham Hancock visits Rapa Nui in Ancient Apocalypse in the new season. And while I've not watched the whole thing, I kind of watched 2 of the episodes and read the transcript due to a certain TikTok referencing this episode. What struck me was that Hancock never mentioned the movement of the statue or seemed to see that as any sort of mystery.
When the first Europeans arrived in 1722, the Rapa Nui culture had already been nearly wiped out. And few could imagine how such primitive people could have created the Moai.
How in the heck did they make these? Where did they come from? And how did they move them? Nobody has the answer.
He brings up that they were moved, but he don't really focus on how. He don't really seem to care about that. It can be editing, of course. It can be editing from the producers of the show, and there might have been more to this. But, I mean, it's strange that the study from 2013 was not brought up, because it's something Hancock actively asking for in his books, in this episode. We take this myth and we test them. Instead, we get this weird idea that the island has some sort of lost civilization connected to the meteor striking 10,000 years ago. The Polynesian came here and the statues was basically already in place, according to Hancock. How he gets to that conclusion is a little bit unclear, especially since there's no evidence of an earlier population of the island, and he suggests it and kind of take it as a fact, because how could you prove it? You can't carbon-14 stone. What we can do is look at the archaeological record, of course, because, we can't see 14 stone. And what traces can we find of human activity? Well, it can be trash, it can be agriculture, slaughter, burials, fireplace, and the list goes on. It goes on. Of course, we have found evidence of human activity on Rapa Nui or Easter Island, but it doesn't really start until 1200 CE. While some radiocarbon dates have shown older dates, they've all so far been problematic. Terry Hunt do discuss in the Scientific American that the most likely date for people arriving to the island is around 1200 CE. And while he do humor the idea of an earlier population, he knows that it would have been so small that it would not appear in the archaeological record. So would this small group be able to erect all these statues without leaving a single trace? Well, as we discussed in the episode of the Kensington Runestone, people leave traces, especially if we build or occupy an area for a longer time. But that's kind of the thing here. The Hancocks and the ancient alien proponents of the world are not here to offer answers, but to sell you a mystery in a sense. It then gets even worse when we go to TikTok where the source criticism of ancient aliens seems to be a paragon of light in comparison. You should be lucky if you're unaware of the quote, comedian unquote, Johanna James. It's not a person new to the show really, or at least to my social media. I've done some videos debunking her claims in the past. However, she is a presence on TikTok and has been involved with the Cosmic Summit and similar events in the past. And quite recently, she put out a video discussing Rapa Nui, and she even went there to investigate in the Moai statue herself because, yeah, that's what you do apparently. And if you find ancient aliens' use of sources frustrating, things do not become better on TikTok. In this video on Rapa Nui, Jenna claims to have read multiple articles and even give us this quote.
Now, in one of the papers, this is the carbon dating evidence of human presence and its age. And there is a piece of evidence for human presence 2,400 radiocarbon years old. And I couldn't see in the paper what that was referring to, but it's in there. It's in the test results.
On the screen, we see graphs showing the amount of samples and how old they are. The paper is never mentioned, of course, nor is it listed in any sources provided by James. In the graph, we see that there is one sample that's 2,400 years old. The issue is that the graph is meant to show the numbers of samples taken and the number of reliable samples. Parts of a few bars are in a different color to show samples that were not contaminated or otherwise problematic from a scientific perspective. The 2,400-year-old sample is one of those who were very uncertain and showed an extensive range of possible dates it could be applied to, meaning it's not really much of use to us in this case. We should note, though, that this was not a paper but an article from the American scientist, and if you're curious, the article in question is called Rethinking the Fall of Easter Island, written by Terry Hunt. So if we read the article, we learn that the samples taken in situ and in good condition are more or less 900 years old, indicating that the settlement started around 1200 CE, as we already demonstrated here. Hancock and others have, though, objected to this relatively late settlement date.
But if you've watched the Ancient Apocalypse Graham Hancock Series 2, he does an episode on Easter Island and he speaks to an archaeologist who found an ancient piece of banana seed that had been planted, because you have to plant. So it wasn't from a bird, it wasn't from the sea. They had planted and harvested bananas like humans had, and the dating that she had was 2,000-3,000 years old. I don't know if this is related to the banana thing or if it's separate. If it's separate, that's cool. If it's the same thing, that's cool.
To show that it's possible that people have been on Rapa Nui for a longer time, Hancock in Ancient Apocalypse talked with Sonia Hoa Cardinale. And she is an archaeologist that's actively working on Rapa Nui. And in episode 3, Hoa Cardinale talks about a banana seed with a 3000 BP C14 date. Bit of a red flag is that these seeds and date are not yet published. If Hoa Cardinale gets the data out there, it might be an exciting find and might correlate with the settlement process, for example, of Vanuatu in in 2020, a team could, based on dental calculus, actually show that bananas made it to the island with a new settlement wave in around 2900 BP. And it might correspond with an earlier settlement of Rapa Nui, but again, it's not really been shown in the archaeological material, and we might or might not have these banana seed that Hoa Cardinale talks about. But from the information we have, there is a case to be made that we should be a bit cautious regarding this claim, especially since it's announced in Ancient Apocalypse and not in a scientific journal or even in a scientific newspaper. I've tried to find out where this might have been published previously, but I've not managed to find anything in writing where, how, anything about this sample, unfortunately. But it's interesting to see how these competing ideas regarding aliens versus lost civilization use a site and different narratives in their, coverage of a site. They can rely on the same myth and the same stories, but one gets Atlantis and another one gets aliens, and it kind of demonstrates how lofty they are with these claims. It's not really about a scientific approach. It's about sensationalism. It's about views, getting ideas out there. But let's shift over to the US of A and a site that's not really ancient at all. I'm just going to pause the episode here and thank you, my dear listener, for tuning in. It's great having you here exploring the world of pseudoscience with me. If you want to support the cause of educating people and combating pseudoscience, I'd like if you become a Patreon or a paid subscriber of the show. For as little as $2.50 per episode, which is less than what the Loch Ness Monster asked for, you will help me continue producing high-quality content and gain access to a treasure trove of exclusive bonus material. Imagine the benefits of becoming a paid subscriber, where you gain VIP access to our exclusive pseudoscientific book club. You will have the opportunity to hear me read and discuss the works of our favorite on-screen experts for you. To sign up and become a paid subscriber, simply head over to diggingupancientaliens.com/support. You will find all the information you need to join our community there. Your backing of the program would empower me to create more content that assists people while keeping the show as accessible as possible. So let's combat misinformation and pseudoscience together. Just head over to diggingupancientaliens.com/support to sign up. Together, we will uncover the truth one episode at a time. Welcome back. We've moved quite a bit from Easter Island to Florida during the 1900s, and we're here to visit the Coral Castle, one of the few modern megalithic sites built. And it's a place loved by ancient alien believers, conspiracy theorists, and alternative energy people. The backstory for this place goes something like this.
He was in love with a woman, and he wanted to build this facility in memory of her, and he waited for her to come from Europe. And he waited, and he waited, and she never did. But the big question is how did this frail little man move these thousands of pounds of block by himself?
Now, if you're not familiar with this site, it's a park built by Edward Ledskalnin. Construction started in about 1928 and continued until Ledskalnin died in 1951. While the place is known as the Coral Castle, it's not really a castle, and previously it's been known as Ed's Plains or Rockgate Park. But the Coral Castle, it's not really a castle, and the coral is Not really coral either. It's actually local oolite limestone. And Ledskalnin started the project as a tribute to his, 16-year-old fiancée. He was, 26 at the time or something like that? Not great. Who broke off the engagement a day before the wedding. Edward, originally from Latvia, then decided to move to the US in an attempt to, maybe mend his broken heart. But he then instead started to construct this park as, token of love to, as he called it, his forever sweet 16.
Barely over 5 feet tall and weighing just 100 pounds, Ledskalnin is said to have carved, moved, and hoisted huge multi-ton stones using only a makeshift tripod.
How could this man alone construct this park? Something often left out of the discussion is that Ledskalnin came from a family of, stonemasons. He was even trained as a mason who specialized in gravestones. And oolite limestone is a quite porous and soft stone that can be easily quarried and worked with simple tools. So when it comes to the quarry and masonry at Coral Castle, there's no need for aliens or really specialized laser tools or anything like that. It can be simply explained by, Ledskalnin's training and his expertise on how to work with rock as a medium, both for sculpture or even quarrying to some extent. In addition to this, he worked in lumber camps and for cattle drives. So he wasn't really a frail man, so to say. He might have been short or small, but he was not weak as people tend to frame him as. And he was used to hard work and figure things out as he went. There's also claims that Ed didn't use tools, but a wide assortment of masonry tools are today on display in his old tool shed, so make of that information as you wish. And if we go out on alternative history sites, the focus will often be how this man alone could move these stones by himself. And the answer usually left out from these places are that, for the most part, he seems to have used block and tackle, something we even can see in images of him using these kind of tools. So we have images of Ed Ledskalnin using block and tackle to get these structures and stone blocks up where he wants them. And we see these similar methods used by, for example, Wally Wallington that we have discussed in previous episode a couple of times now. Now, this is the man who created his own Stonehenge in his backyard in an attempt to kind of figure out how you could move these giant blocks with very simple tools. And Wallington moves this very large, heavy block by himself. For example, with a simple pebble as a fulcrum, Wallington moves blocks weighing about 1 ton, as if there was basically nothing, and he raises large megalithic blocks up several meters up into the air by himself using nothing more than sticks and a bit of wood and just rocking the block back and forth until he get it up on the height that he wish it. And it seems as Ledskalnin use these similar tricks too. And we even have an example where he actually used not a pebble, but a similar method to move very large blocks. For example, in one of the giant stone gates at the park. And this is a massive slab. And from the looks of it, it seemed to weigh a lot. But what was interesting about it was that you could operate it with a finger. This large megalithic block could be just opened and closed, moved back and forward with no power, it seems like, at all. Now, the mystery of this door was finally revealed in 1986 when it actually broke. And beneath the slab, it turns out that it was a truck bearing on top of a metal shaft that allowed this block to swing freely on in the gate, so to say. Similar as Wally Wallington and his pebble under his large block that he moved across a field. So if it's just a bit of ingenuity and tricks, how has the park become so connected with aliens and alternative technology?
He had some kind of magnetic machine down in one of his other house areas that has since been dismantled, but it had a revolving ability. He may have been having that thing spin. The whole place could have been anti-gravity. Probably just pushed these into place.
This is due to Ledskanin's ability to, well, sell a story, really. As Karen Stolzno points out in an article on Coral Castle, when Ed was asked about how he moved the blocks, Ed would just say, "I have discovered the secrets of the pyramids," with a bit of a smirk on his face, apparently. And suppose someone would suggest some mystical technique like Tibetan monk technique, singing to the stones, using extraterrestrial help, or even possessing superhuman strength. And in those cases, Ed seems to just have nodded and gone along with it. All explanations that seemed fun seemed to be what he preferred to tell to people. And another often heard claim is that he worked alone at night. And this appears to have some truth to it, according to Stolzno. And it might not be so much for secrecy, but basically escaping the hot Florida sun. But of course, things are more complicated to see in the dark from the distance if you're trying to spy on what Ed is doing. And of course, you can get the feeling that he's up to something or trying to hide something in the dark. But in reality, it's just comfort in the end. Edward Ledskanin also cultivated his advanced technology myth by publishing pamphlets on magnetism and electricity. And these writings have been adopted by, for example, the free energy movement or the perpetual engine people, for example. And most of this writing seems to not really contain much advanced knowledge in today's measurements. Barely in the age of Edward Ledskanin too, but it's primarily a bunch of strange ideas on how magnetism influenced the world, and even some darker themes, as Brian Dunning mentioned, that, these magnetic ramblings also contain, quote, a political rant that sounds like Hitler could have written it. And the museum has continued selling this mystical story today. Benjamin Radford mentioned in an article for Life Science that the museum website wrote, quote, "Coral Castle has baffled scientists and engineers and scholars since its opening in 1923. But Coral Castle is impressive, but not really for any alternative explanations or ancient aliens at the sites. It's impressive because it demonstrates how single person can build this massive megalithic construction with very little tools, equipment, and machinery, basically. All they need is a bit of ingenuity, some fulcrum, some levels, and then they get this structure up there. And why it's a mystery today is because we don't need to work with stone like this any longer. We don't have to figure these kind of things out. And there's so many ways that you could do this without machinery. If you try to just think about it for a moment and try to experiment. And as Wally Wallington demonstrated, once you figure out how fulcrums and all that works, things get a lot easier. And the people of the past definitely understood these techniques and could utilize them in their construction work. So while it's somewhat a mystery in the sense of the word today for archaeologists, it's not really a mystery for people who, as Edward Ledskanin put it, figure out how they built the pyramids. And on that note, I will close out this episode. But until next time, please spread the word by leaving a positive reviews on platforms like iTunes, Spotify, or to your friend. That's even better. Recommend an episode or two that you really like to one of your friends, and well, it really gets them hooked in most cases, and well, it helps the show grows. And if you want the sources and resources I used to produce this episode, make sure to check out the episode page over at diggingupancientaliens.com. And there you can also find the different routes on how to support the show with money if you like. If you're doing that, you get bonus content, earlier episode, even extended episodes. And of course, they are all ad-free. Either you head to patreon.com/diggingupancientaliens, or you head to the membership area on diggingupancientaliens.com/support. And I also recommend you checking out the Archaeological Podcast Network that has an anniversary coming up here at the 25th of November, where there will be a couple of live streams over on Discords. And make sure to check out all the amazing shows on the network if you want more archaeology in your life. If you want to contact me, it can be done through most social media sites, or you can send an email in all caps that I suppose that you want to do. And you find my email on the contact page on the website again. Sandra Martelor created intro music, and our outro is by the band called Trallskruv, who sings their song Foliehatt. Links to both of these artists can be found in the show notes. Until next time, keep shoveling that science.